This video is going to be about how avoidants experience breakups, what is happening to them in their inner world, and what happens to you if you are stuck in waiting, and when it is worth to be waiting and when not. So let's start with what happens to the avoidant immediately after a breakup. The first thing, what they feel is a relief. And one thing you should know, not just about avoidance, but about all people. When we want to distance ourselves from another person, if you feel this impulse that you want to distance, we are not distancing ourselves from the person, but we want to distance ourselves from the feelings, from our own feelings that arise in contact with them. The source of pain here is that these feelings usually don't align with how we think we should be. So basically, they threaten a certain image of ourselves that has been built on defenses or a false self rather than our authentic self. And pulling away will initially provide relief, but because the motivation behind this pull is to protect a false image of self, so pulling away will initially provide relief. But because the motivation behind this pull is to protect false image of self rather than establish a connection with the authentic self. And for this reason, this relief will not last long. Obviously, I think it's obvious for everyone that avoidance is not the same as independence. It's actually the opposite. Avoidance is an attempt to control dependency. Avoidance didn't have a safe experience of separateness during development. But to experience healthy closeness, both connection and separateness are needed at the same time. Without feeling separate, closeness becomes perceived as dependency. Whenever we start attaching to someone else, the psyche always refers back to our first experiences of attachment. For avoidance, since their early experience of attachment were not safe, the psyche associates attachment with helplessness and dependency. For avoidance, there is a deep-rooted belief that if they start considering someone else's needs, their own needs will be threatened. Closeness is seen as something threatening, and the natural need for connection that everybody has gets pushed aside by the mind, making it unavailable to conscious awareness. One example of a defense mechanism used by avoidance is projection. They project their unmet need for closeness onto their partner, making it feel like it's the partner is the one pressuring them for intimacy and overwhelming them. In reality, it's the avoidant who craves closeness but fears being overwhelmed by their own emotions. A breakup provides avoidance with short-lived relief from the inner conflict between their need for closeness and perceiving closeness as a threat to their independence. Because the avoidance need for closeness goes unrecognized and unmet, the pain from this unfulfilled need is delayed and can be triggered by something seemingly unrelated. And this is actually the second defense mechanism that the psyche uses to cope with the breakup, and it is called repression. So in stage 2, when the repressed pain resurfaces after all, avoidants often can't process it because to grieve a loss of something, they first need to admit they needed it. To initiate the grieving process, one must acknowledge the value of what was lost, and only then will the process lead to the value gained from the experience. And this is how grieving leads to emotional evolution and growth. But since acknowledging the value of closeness is out of reach for avoidance, the grieving process and growth and emotional evolution along with it gets substituted with devaluation of the connection. To avoid processing the pain, avoidants often turn to coping mechanisms like addictions, promiscuity, working excessively, diving into new hobbies, starting new relationships. Avoidant attachment style reflects how they treat their own emotions with avoidance. At the next stage of this process, this suppressed need for closeness will start resurfacing through dreams, longing, missing the other person, and a sense of emptiness. In other words, this will create some sort of discomfort that may drive them to take some action in an attempt to reconnect with you. Unfortunately, though, connection always brings the discomfort they ran away at starting with. And to be connected to another person in a meaningful way means admitting the influence of the other person, admitting something we can't control and something we depend on. But what keeps us together is that in the end, we can create a connection where there is more love and desire to develop this connection than there is pain. But when closeness is seen as something that destroys, it becomes really hard to achieve it. Because as mentioned earlier, defense mechanisms are triggered. And these mechanisms protect us from the pain that comes with vulnerability in relationships, but they do so by devaluing the connection itself. And now we are moving to the part where we can discuss whether to wait or not. But to be honest, that question will answer itself once you understand and ask yourself, why? Why am I waiting? Loving yourself means being curious about yourself, genuinely trying to understand why you are choosing this particular strategy right now. Behind this strategy is most likely a need for closeness. And instead of splitting yourself into right or wrong, let's explore what might drive a person to choose to wait rather than find another way to fulfill that need. So in the first of, I call it sunk costs. Often we don't cling to the relationship itself, but to the hope of finally getting what we believe we deserve. Waiting is often a hallmark of a trauma bond because it happens when you are loving the person you wish they would be if they weren't trapped in their wounds, more than the person they are right now. This leads to rejecting who they truly are in the present moment, as you are attached to an idealized version of them rather than accepting them for who they truly are. And this is why experiencing a real closeness in a trauma bond is nearly impossible. If you'd like to learn more about the types of trauma bonds that exist and understand your own unique emotional patterns at play, especially if you notice signs like emotional highs, lows, feeling emotionally dependent, I'm going to leave a link to a free test to help you identify what trauma bond you might be in and how to break free. When we love who someone can be, we start investing in the relationship with the hope of a future return. So you start giving in advance, subconsciously hoping they'll give it back someday. But giving in advance, putting their needs ahead of your own, is a self-sacrifice dressed up as love or care. Most likely, this echoes something from childhood. Some early lesson that love means giving everything, even when nothing comes in return. And this creates sunk costs, and it becomes incredibly difficult to grieve the fact that no one will cover them, not because they don't want to, but because they simply don't have the capacity to do so. People always give you what they have. If they don't, it's because they do not have it. Next reason why we wait is waiting for what was lost through expectations. Here's how it works. When we really like someone or feel relationship becomes overly significant, perhaps through idealization or projection, which I'm going to discuss next, it always creates an impulse to conform to their expectations. But not even their real ones, but the expectations we imagine they have. So we stop expressing who we truly feel, who we truly are and what we truly need. And instead we focus on meeting the imagined expectations of the other person. And it always creates a sense of lack and fear of losing the relationship, because for the psyche, it feels like that person is taking a part of us and is the only one who can give it back. But in reality, it's not them. It's us limiting ourselves. Next reason why we choose to wait is the projection of past emotional needs. So again, we often don't cling to the relationship itself, but to the hope of finally getting what we believe we deserve. When experiencing a particular emotional state or certain experience becomes super important next to a particular person, it's the first sign that a projection of a significant adult, mother, father, someone else from your childhood, someone with whom you could not experience something that was important for you then. So it's a sign that that projection has been triggered. And the psych tries to recreate the situation in hopes of finally fulfilling the unmet need. To understand why this happens, a primary caregiver's role, usually a mother, is to recognize and name the child's emotions and needs. And if this wasn't done at a certain point, the need remained unrecognized and unfulfilled. And as a result, the psych carries this unresolved need through life. It's not even unresolved need, it carries a sense of lack. And when this projection gets triggered with another person, it feels like an essential and urgent and kind of like one in a lifetime chance opportunity to finally have that lack resolved, to finally have some need recognized and met. And this is the foundation of each trauma bond, waiting for another person to recognize in you what you haven't yet recognized and discovered and understood in yourself. For example, when you ask for love but confuse it with sacrifice, when you ask for depth but confuse it with pain, when you ask for connection but mistake it for dependency, you are unconsciously searching for something that only you can truly identify. No one else has access to what's happening inside of you. And until you recognize it for yourself, you'll continue to look outside for what only you can heal. Next reason is waiting because we find ourselves in the rejection trauma pool. And it's when you don't necessarily want to be with them, but you want them to want to be with you. I'm going to leave the link in the description for the video on rejection trauma pool and how to break it. Another reason is that waiting is a form of control. When we don't want to accept reality as it is, we're trying to manipulate the narrative through hope. Waiting helps with fear by giving us a sense of control over an uncertain situation. So it creates an illusion of action, as if by waiting, we are actively doing something to influence the outcome. And this can provide temporary relief from the fear of the unknown or the fear of losing something, as we hold on to the hope that things will change or resolve in our favor. However, it's often more about avoiding the discomfort of accepting the present reality rather than truly addressing the underlying fear. And more about waiting as a control is in the link below. I have a full video on it as well. If you find yourself waiting, DM me the word waiting to book your first free session. Take your need for closeness off hold so you can truly enjoy it and create the relationships you deserve. And as always, please comment, like, subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.